Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at Total War Warhammer 3 and we're going to be looking at the different starting armies and legendary lords for the Empire faction. This series hopefully will help new players understand what armies the lords start with and whether or not they're good in the early game or not, how difficult they might be, because the game doesn't do a great job of explaining that. Now, let's get into the video. Now, obviously, this is in Immortal Empires, because you obviously can't play them in the Realms of Chaos map. Starting with Karl Franz here, who starts there in Reichland, where he started in Warhammer 2 as well. He's not moved very much, still surrounded by the Empire Successionists to the south and all of the Empire counts around him. He starts with a very well-rounded army of swordsmen and halberdiers, very nice. As well as great swords, which are a really good early game infantry to have at beating other melee units. Handgunners. Handgunners are an excellent missile unit if you flank with them. They cannot shoot over other units very well, but if you can get a side shot into the back of an enemy line, they will do a lot of damage. Mortars are very good at destroying large blobs of units that you might have blobbed up with a front line, and they're also really useful for ensuring that you can auto-resolve siege battles because you have a piece of siege equipment. And then you have Reichsguard. Reichsguard are a really decent tier cavalry unit that are very good at running down and killing lots of archer units, skirmisher units, and even some weaker melee units like swordsmen. You also start obviously with Karl Franz himself in the city of Altdorf. Karl Franz has a pretty decent skill tree. You can see the faction effects here. Having plus 10 diplomatic relations with Empire is always very useful. And although the Confederation is a scripted event, it makes it easier to gain fealty to speed up that Confederation. Lord Recruit rank plus 2, also very useful. Means that whenever you spawn in a new lord, they'll already have 2 skill points to allocate, just flat out the gate. Plus 10% campaign movement range is an amazing skill to have, because it's every single army you have, means that they can move 10% further, besiege people, whatever you'd want to do. Karl himself has a minus 25% upkeep for Reichsguard and Greatsword. Obviously you start with both Greatswords and Reichsguard. Greatswords are a tier 3 unit you can get quite quickly, and Reichsguard similar, but you also need a blacksmith to recruit them. However, this does mean that they are a lot cheaper to keep in his army, and although I wouldn't recommend spamming them or even using them much in the late game, the early to mid game they're a very useful unit to have. Leadership plus 8 in the Lord's army, not incredibly useful, but it just means your troops are less likely to rout. Then we move on to Balthasar Gelt. Gelt starts also in the same place he did here at Fildorf down here, with the fort to his south and the goblins over here going into vampire territory over here. Now he starts with a slightly weaker army, I think, than Franz, but it is better if you want to go for a more missile-focused roster, which is what I tend to do when I play Gelt. So he starts with a unit of Outriders. Outriders are fine. They're not the grenade launcher ones, so unfortunately they're not amazing, but they're okay, and they can be used to run down archer units and to do a little bit of missile damage, but I wouldn't recommend recruiting any more. Swordsmen, obviously, pretty standard, as well as some spearmen. Great swords, like Franz, although without the reduced upkeep, but a nice infantry unit to have, as well as a mortar. Same reasons as Franz, good in sieges, good at blobs. He also starts with a unit crossbowmen. Now, you can get crossbowmen very quickly with him, so this isn't an amazing unit to start with, but they are a good missile unit, and will do you well in the early game, especially against orcs and vampires. He also starts with great cannons. Great cannons are really good at taking down big monsters, that especially the vampires have, so they are a very useful unit to have, actually. With his faction effects having some pretty nice buff to battle wizards, so you immediately get plus 2 hero capacity, so the moment you can recruit them, which is when you have a tier 3 settlement and you build the tower that allows you to recruit them, you can have 2 more, meaning you can spread them across your armies, have more magic. Minus 50% upkeep means you can have them for a lot less money, so you don't feel like a financial burden for having that extra capacity. And plus 10 armour across all armies is actually really nice, because it means that everything from artillery units to cavalry to melee infantry will all be stronger, as armour is quite a big standard buff to their survivability, especially against non-armour piercing damage. Then we move on to his lord effects. Hero recruit rank plus 2 for battle wizards. Once again, You've got hero capacity +2 already, so this means that if you recruit one, they will have 2 skill points to spend immediately. This is really good, actually, because it means that, for example, if you recruit a fire battle wizard, they can immediately get Burning Head. It's a useful way of getting a wizard that can immediately have some combat potential. Minus 20% wins and magic cost for Law of Metal. Obviously, Gelt's spellbook is Law of Metal, so this just means everything will be 20% cheaper to cast, and he already has skills in his tree that reduce the cost anyway, so this means that he'll just be an excellent Law of Metal caster. And the Law of Metal itself is actually not a bad Law of Magic. Plus 10% for artillery units. It's a shame this isn't faction-wide, but in the Lord's Army this is pretty good. This just means that everything has a 10% missile strength, but especially with great cannons and their armour-piercing missile and anti-large missiles, 10% stronger is actually really nice to have. Next up, we have Markus Wulfhart, who I consider the weakest of the Empire Lords, with his Huntsmarshal's Expedition faction. Now he starts in Lustria, as he did in Warhammer 2 as well. Not too much movement from these first three, with Mazdamundi above him, and a few Vampire Coast factions and other Lizardman factions beneath him. He himself starts with probably the worst starting army for any faction in the game. He starts with no decent tier 3 or above units, and he starts with bog standard units you can immediately recruit. He starts with spearmen, swordsmen, halberdiers, all of which, fine, they're not bad units, but the Empire can recruit almost all of them immediately anyway. He starts with his own unit of huntsmen. Huntsmen are fine, they are a good anti-large missile unit, however, they are not incredible and they also don't take long to be able to recruit. He starts with archers. I don't like archers, I think crossbowmen are infinitely better and are just about as difficult to get, so never recruit archers. But, you know, he starts with some. They are of use, I suppose. And war wagons. War wagons are god-awful. This isn't even a mortar one, which might have some use. This is the one with crossbowmen in the back, and it's just god-awful. It doesn't do anything, really. It's slow for a chariot unit, so you can't run it through stuff. It's quite squishy. It doesn't do much damage. It's just shit. It's a shit unit, in all honesty. Also, because his faction is out there, he doesn't really get much to recruit, and although he gets the reinforcements, which means that he can get some decent artillery or decent cav quite early on, I just don't like it very much. He starts with +3 rank for Huntsman Generals. Huntsman Generals are pretty good, so that's fine. Recruit rank +3 is pretty good. 3 ability points immediately to destroy, and -40 diplomatic relation development doesn't do anything, because you're going to be at war with them anyway. It's not like you're going to be friends with them, so yeah. Lord effects wise, he actually has some pretty good effects. -50% for archers and huntsmen is not that good, although, as I have said, huntsmen are okay. So -50% upkeep for them. Not bad, especially if you have 6 or 7 of them. +50% ambush success chance is fine, but I don't think the army you're building with him is going to be an ambushy one. You're going to be building a missile-focused one, probably with huntsmen and then maybe some artillery. And that doesn't really work with ambushes as well as having a cav or monster-focused army, which is difficult to do with the Empire. The ambush defense chance +50% is a lot better, although there aren't that many Skaven down there. Other factions will find it very, very difficult to ambush you, so your army will be safe from that, I suppose. But that is just for the Lord's army. And Woodsman is a decent trait. Woodsman itself grants the ability to pass through trees, so trees are not into movement and they can just pass through them, and the entire army can do that, which is fairly good, but not incredible. Finally, we have Volkmar, who's had some big changes since Warhammer 2. He himself starts all the way down here, south of the Badlands, near some quite interesting factions. And he also starts with a pretty decent starter army compared to what he used to have. So he starts with a very well-rounded army. Swordsmen, crossbowmen, halberdiers, all very decent. He also starts with mortars and greatswords, like Balthasar and Karl. Greatswords, great for melee, and mortars, nice blobbed siege unit. Nothing too overly special there. Also starts with some handgunners. I like handgunners. If you use them properly, you can do very well with them. They have armor-piercing damage. If you go into the back of a line of Black Orcs or of enemy greatswords, you'll be slaughtering. He also starts with Empire Knights. Now, Empire Knights are shit compared to Reichsguard. They are better than they were in the second game, but they are not amazing. But they're okay cav unit, especially in the early game for running down goblin archers and orc Araboys and things like that. So they're not awful. But he also starts with a unit of Flagellants. Now, he gives big buffs to Flagellants, as we'll get to in a moment. And Flagellants themselves are actually quite good at just killing some stuff. In the late game, they're not good. But in the early game, yeah, they're pretty good. They're unbreakable, so they're not going to run away. They do a fair amount of damage. They've got a lot of melee attack, as you can see there. Fairly chunky amount. So he starts off with the Books of Nagash collection, faction ability essentially. And this allows him to go and collect the books, which gives him military buffs and stops the enemies from getting them. It's quite a nice mechanic, gives his Cult of Sigmar a bit of flavour, and is quite a fun goal for you to go for in your campaign. Hero recruitment +4 for Witch Hunters and Warrior Priests. Witch Hunters are fairly good standard hero units. Warrior Priests less so. I find them a bit lackluster, but they are okay at buffing and healing your armies. And +4 recruit rank is always nice for both of them, because that gives you traits either for battle capability, or if you want to use them as a hero, it gives you traits in the blue tree, so you can increase their aptitude as a hero. +8 for Flagellants, Empire Knights and Free Company Militia bonus versus infantry. This is a lot worse than it sounds. The only unit really you'll be using it on is the Flagellants, and bonus versus infantry +8 is fine, it's not incredible. Empire Knights, you shouldn't be running them into infantry, they will die. However, it's okay on them, I suppose. And if you are recruiting Free Company Militia, you're a thought, because Free Company Militia are god-awful. They are crap in melee, crap at ranged, they just kind of stand there with their big hats and don't do much. Minus 33% cooldown to battle prayers and accusation is also really... it's okay. Battle prayers are fine, accusation is fine. When you recruit theologians and warrior priests, it means they'll have a cooldown on their spells reduced, so it's not bad, but it's not amazing. He himself gets some better buffs. Control +4 local province means that if you're busy conquering a province, it'll stop it rebelling as fast. Relatively nice, nothing incredible though. 10% physical resistance for Flagellants, Empire Knights and Free Company Militia. Now, Flagellants, very nice. 10% physical resistance on. 10% for Flagellants is not bad. You know, I'll take it. And Empire Knights, once again, not bad. Physical resistance is always good. Good against arrows, good against melee attacks. However, Empire Knights and Free Company Militia are shit. And you won't be using Flagellants in the late game, so it's not incredible. Same with the one below it. +8 melee defense. So he makes these units very tanky, but you'll be using Flagellants in the early game and then you'll get rid of them, and you shouldn't be using Empire Knights or Free Company Militia because they're just bad. And so he doesn't really do a lot as a lord. He himself gets, you know, he gets his cool mount and he has some cool spells, but he's not that incredible. If I was playing Empire, I would play Karl or Balthasar. They both start with good armies, in good locations, ready to confederate the rest of the Empire. They're both good lords. Karl in melee, Balthasar as a caster. They both start with very good faction and lord effects. Volkmar has an interesting faction mechanic, but is once again still quite a weak lord. And Markus, well, he's just... no. Just no. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video, at least to some extent, and that you learnt something. I will be releasing these for a lot of the races in Warhammer 3 to help new players understand the factions, the lords, and the armies that they start with. Please like and or subscribe if you feel inclined to do so, and leave a comment. I shall reply to any that are left. Thank you very much and have a good day, folks.